So with that, let's open it up for Q&A. Davida, I know we have some questions coming in, so let's jump into it.
Perfect. First one, James, is to yourself. Are there any conditions for applying the IPD model? Are there certain conditions where it will work and others where it won't work?
So what we've found is that definitely large projects that are complicated. So for us, that's anything over 10 or $20 million in construction value is going to be is going to be an IPD project. If the scope is relatively simple, so there was an early example, like if it is just some kind of a single trade, it's very clear what the work is going to be. It's not high risk, then we will still use basically a lump sum contract, or we will just negotiate $3 or $4 million. We'll negotiate a guaranteed maximum price contract because there's a lot of administrative work on separating out the profit and auditing costs, and the invoices get very big because everything is actual cost. So I think smaller, simpler, shorter projects don't get as much value from IPD, although you could do them with an IPD model. Definitely longer, bigger, more complicated. The more likely things are to change during construction makes IPD more valuable. So that's how I would separate it out.
Thank you. I see there's a follow-up question asking, can you provide some examples of IPD major construction projects in the union strong sectors?
In which sectors?
Where unions are quite strong.
Well, I would say in Northern California, if you're going to build a hospital, it's going to be union because we don't have big, sophisticated non-union trades in this market. So pretty much everything that we've built, about $4 billion worth of projects in strong union environments. There are other people who are piloting semiconductor plants, which are often union in our area, just again, because our big sophisticated MEP trades are almost all union. And oil and gas is starting to go this route in our market. So yeah, I would say it's mostly in union areas for us.
Thanks, James. I'm going to open this one up to all three speakers. What are the key drivers for limiting change? And the question that goes with that is, when you've got these owner requests for changes, how can you resist that effectively?
Okay, Chris. I think the most important thing is actually in your feasibility and planning phases that you make sure is at the stage of approving your project for implementation that you actually have done all the work. But very often people at that stage only do it from a project basis. But if you have your operational people and all stakeholders involved in agreeing what you're doing, the chance of actually getting a new request during the next phase is a lot less. Then it must only be things like market changing and those types of things coming through in the next phase, except for the things that we've mentioned earlier, site conditions that you really can't do much about. But it's key to make sure at that stage you've done your work, that you don't actually open up a project for things that you haven't considered later.
Yeah, we found, Davida, that very often the project people are so focused on getting the project done, mechanistically I almost want to say, that they don't want to involve the owner people in the designs, in the reviews and things. They say they just complicate matters, they make decisions take longer and all that. So please keep them out of our way so that we can, complete the project. That sort of attitude is really a recipe for later big problems during handover, lots of change requests and so on. You have to have the whole team involved, as Koos says. It is extremely important. And then you have to do strict change control then. I mean, there's often people that come and say, hey, I would like to have a bigger road, or A very nice example I had where I had to go to France to go and arbitrate on a project at the engineering contractor's offices was the where our store was 100 millimeters, 4 inches thick. The owner suddenly decided he wants to use bigger forklifts, and now he wants a 6-inch thick floor. And it really created a lot of havoc, a lot of unhappiness and things at that point. And you must sort those things out during the design, and then you will say, will this thing work? Is it safe? Will it work? Sorry, I do not change it anymore. Otherwise, the scope creeps up and up and up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Freek. James, you want to add anything?
I would just basically say we have very similar experience. So within our validation process, which we covered in the design phase, the primary user of the project actually needs to sign off on that report along with the design and construction team. So that locks the team in, but it also locks the owner in. And from there, the only changes that we're going to make are something that has a major business reason to make the change. They're not because, well, I just decided I don't like that finished material and I want something else. It's that, you know, when we started the project, we couldn't justify having an MRI. And now the population has grown and there's now a business case to implement that into the project. Change is just part of healthcare projects. I don't think that we've ever finished a hospital where we didn't have a remodel project starting in the hospital before it even opened. Just to give you an idea, it's part of our life. What we're doing is we're only trying to implement changes that have a real business driver behind them and not just because somebody's preference changed.
Yeah, and that reminds me about something that we do, or we used to do, James, is when there is such a change, and sometimes it is so, the market, say the product quality has now changed or something, and you must add another step, you actually leave the project team to complete the project as it is. And you come with a backup team to make a change and redo that. Because if you stop that flow of the project, you know, and the project gets a rhythm in that and it goes. If you now introduce something in the middle of that, then, you know, you really stop that whole rhythm and then you can lose a lot of time. So rather than bring in another team to come behind and fix that up.
That's a really good example. Thank you, Freek. And I think if I can maybe add a comment, James, I think that's why the IPD model works so well with all these changes, because people work together to find solutions. So, you know, if it comes through, they work together to fix it. Yeah, that's just a side comment. Koos, I think the next one is to you. Who takes ownership for commissioning? Is it the project or the business? Because it seems like this interface is quite important and needs quite a bit of attention.
Yeah, David, there's actually quite a lot of models to do that, but to me, it's definitely not for project team. It's for operations. But what we have specifically have done in our cement projects, you can basically say there's two teams. It's for people ultimately going to run the operations, but that is separate from the commissioning team. You bring in a commissioning team that's a group of process guys, group of operational guys, and they actually focusing on getting your site commissioned and get it ramp up. And the operation guys will only take over at that stage, although your operational people will be there long before the time. As per the example that Freek have just mentioned on when there's a change, your project guys is there to focus on completing the project. From your commissioning, there will be issues coming through and snags that they will have to go and fix your project guy, but they are not really there to commission your project.
Yeah, and they don't know how to commission either. The operators know how to operate. You need expert commissioning guys that can help plan and commissioning. So we had a commissioning team that will actually go around and assist in planning and managing the commissioning. Together with the operators, they must be involved, but it's not like a startup of a plant after a turnaround. A commissioning is a very different exercise.
Yeah.
And to add, you want to bring your best guys actually in to do that.
Yeah.
Guys, if there's noise in my background, we've got a bit of a thunderstorm going here. I hope it's not too much of an interference. Okay, James, another one to you. When the you spoke about the change management and how it's seated in about 3 people to approve changes. How do the managers that normally approve change feel about this, and how do you sort of manage that change? If they go away.
Well, it has been a growing process in that some people they used to feel that if there's money left at the end of a project, that it's their money to spend. And what we've had to change is that, no, it's not your money to spend. The overall health system needs to decide where the most effective use of that capital is. And so it may be to make the change that you want on the project, but it may also be to fund another project across town that you don't know about. And so what we basically say is, look, we're more than happy to support this change, but it needs to go through this level of executive leadership. If you're willing to present it to them, then we will prepare all of the documentation for you. So we'll put an A3 together. We have a scope change form. The other thing is that our department is the project management group will advise on whether we are comfortable recommending using project contingency to make their change, or whether we recommend that they get additional funding. So sometimes if they want to make a $5 million change, but we haven't even got out of design yet, we will say, it's too early to spend project contingency on adding scope, and we recommend you go get more money. If it's near the end of the job, we say, look, if the leadership supports spending $5 million of unused contingency to make this change, then that's up to them. And if they want to do it, then we are more than happy to implement it. So we try to make it not confrontational. We try to make it between the managers and their leadership about whether they can justify the change. And our job is to facilitate the process and implement the change.
Yeah, James, my view is...
Really nice process.
Sorry,
yeah, my view in this is quite strong. If there's anything that's added scope, it never comes out of contingency. You really start making it potentially too easy for people. You must get new money for that, even if you're going to give your contingency back. The decision makers on that will anyway know the big picture, because you're going to tell them up front what's your final estimated cost and how much contingency you think you're going to save. But to me, I feel very strong the best place is to actually get new money for that, because it's a new motivation.
Fred, you wanted to add?
What I wanted to say was, I actually found that the people on the ground trying to execute the project manager, project directors, those people actually like this approach. Because if you don't have this approach, they sit in the middle now, and they have to make this decision, and it's on behalf of the business type of decision. It really puts them in a very difficult position, between these parties trying to arbitrate and decide whether this is in or out. So in my viewpoint, where we have done this in sort of latter years, actually the project people liked it very much.
Thank you. James, I'm not done with you yet. On a ratio basis, what's the time spent on planning versus costing in the IPD model?
I don't know. They both feel like full-time jobs. Cost is never far from any conversation that we ever have. Pretty much anything we talk about is like, okay, well, how much is that going to cost? It's challenging for the design team, because every single sentence is ended with and costs X dollars. Really, there's probably a division. We have people on the team that are very focused on the planning and the scheduling, and we have a different group of people who are more specialized in the cost management, and they're both pretty much working full time on their respective piece on big jobs, if that makes sense.
Sense. Thank you. And then another question on IPD. It seems there's a lot of interest in the topic. Are only the core group agents sharing the profit? And the example was used for drywalling. If you've got trades like drywalling, are they included in that profit sharing structure? The side comment was made to say so many things can go wrong before drywalling actually starts.
Yes. So drywall, I at a minimum, I would have mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and framing and drywall in the pool. Yes, there are a lot of things that could go wrong before drywall, but also the majority of productivity issues with overhead has to do with coordinating with priority walls, full height walls for drywall. So I think the drywall and primarily the mechanical contractor are really the two companies that drive productivity. And the jobs we've saved the most money are where the drywalling contractor was less efficient and spent a little bit more money to make the mechanical contractor significantly more efficient. And that's where we've seen the most savings on projects.
Excellent. Well, this is a last question, and any one of the presenters that would like to answer is welcome. Master scheduling is obviously a very useful tool, and it makes sense to also use it, especially when you've got multiple projects. In your experience, how do you actually pull this together to make sure that the information you get from the various bits and pieces contributing to the project is accurate? So, and it maybe relates to your reporting as well. How do you make sure the information you get for your forecasting, for your reporting, for your master schedule, for your cost reports, how do you make sure, well, how can you be sure it is realistic and accurate information? Is there anything that contributes to that or that can make it happen?
It's a bit of a big question if you put all the things together. The one point I have, if you put some experts around the table, and it's the same for if you ask people how many beans are in this jar, and you have 20 people guess, and you take the average, it will be very close to the right number. I mean, that's a sort of a theory that's, I think, proven often. So my approach is that if you actually put people that know what they do around the table, and you develop a master schedule from that, I think we'll be pretty close to the right number. Then, of course, you must have the proper schedule underlying it in order to do your forecasting and all those and see where you're going. I am a bit against, starting to develop a big schedule without having a feel and understanding of what it means. That's why I like this approach of starting with some people that have the experience and so on, putting them around the table. I have a nice example of a project that I worked on. We started in January 1990 on the project, January the 2nd. I can remember it very nicely. By January, about 2 weeks later, we had a scope and an estimate for this project of what we think it will cost, and we used various people in the way I just explained. We actually execute that project 4 years later for about 10% below that cost. The actual electrical people here towards the end of detailed engineering were very pleased in that they now had all the detailed cost estimates for all the cabling, the rolls, the thickness of the cables, how they're going to cut the cables to optimize it. And they went to the project manager, who was a very experienced guy, and said, this is what the cables will cost. He says, well, let me pull out my little black book of January the 14th, 3 years ago. And he said, no, your answer is right. It's the same as in my black book.
I think the other important, you have to do the work. You have to spend time on the detail and make sure as you understand the various components. But what I also find a very handy tool is when you've completed everything, is when you put it together, you do, I'm using normally Excel at risk program to do that, but you do your Monte Carlo sensitivities on every activity, on every cost. So you basically say is this is your best view, this is the low number, this is the high number, and what's the likelihood. If you start putting that together, you quickly get a picture of how fast you can do the project, how potentially late, the best time, and also in your cost side. And that's a nice quality check at the end that you're happy. And when you do that, that's where you also bring your experts together of experienced guys that they look at that and come with that. Then it's another way of benchmarking at the end. And that helps a lot.
Thank you, Chris. James, there's one more question that came through, and it's just asking for a bit of practical tips on safety. What works in terms of making safety work? Rick, I don't know if you've got some wisdom.
Yeah, so for very practical tips, and this may seem simple, but it actually doesn't happen as often as it should, is keeping the site as clean as possible.
Yes.
So the more we use the last planner system and involve the foreman on the job in the scheduling, we can do just-in-time deliveries. So not having a bunch of stuff at the site that doesn't need to be on the site until it's ready to be installed. Keeping the floor broom clean all the time. So literally sweeping the floor every day. I showed an image of us inserting the anchor bolts for the hangers before we place the deck. Well, the number one injury that we have on our projects is people getting things in their eyes and people cutting their hands. The number one way to get stuff in your eye is when you have to drill into the concrete above your head. So by coordinating and not changing the model, we're getting rid of a ton of those injuries by just not having people have to drill into concrete up above their head. And then the majority of stuff can now be pre-cut and delivered. And so doing less cutting on site. Also only putting things on the site on dollies so that they can be moved around and that stuff can be moved out of the way so people don't have to put ladders over a stack of metal studs. It's really just making it so people don't have to do stupid stuff to get the work done. That's my very basic practical tip.
Very good comments.
Yeah. I think when you walk onto a site, you can see whether the project's safe or not. As you say, James, it's very clear. A couple of things we used to do, I think. The one thing is you must make it visible that you're serious about safety. And those things could have various aspects like safety talks, toolbox talks, being on site, checking safety, making people make safety observations and those sort of things. But the one thing we found that works quite well during the heavy construction period that I think is quite interesting is to use a theater type approach where we have some actors that come in and act out safety things. We find when all these construction workers on site, they're not necessarily people that read bulletin boards and do all these things and necessarily even understand the safety talk. But we found and they call themselves an industrial theater. So we pay these actors, they come and they act out something. And it's somewhat a bit entertaining. The people like to attend it. And we find wherever we've introduced this industrial theater concept that it really improved safety.
Thank you, Chris. Any last wisdom from your side?
No, not really, but it's the integrated approach. You have to look at all the things in holistically, and you must always see the end game. You must look basically from the side and look at the end game, because otherwise you're going to miss the boat.
Thank you, James. That's it on the Q&A.
All right. Well, Kuz, Davida, Frick, thank you so much. Thank you everyone else for attending. And we really hope to see you back in 2 weeks when we wrap up the webinar series with the Effective Project team. Everybody go out and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody.